Welcome, lovelies, to Hello, It's Better to Talk. Today we're going to be talking about something that not everybody believes in, ghosts. And I'm going to be talking about growing up in a haunted house, both in Yorkshire, Slade Houghton Hall, and in Cornwall, the Salt Box. Now, I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you walk into a room or into a house and the atmosphere just feels really strange. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Hello, my name's Helen Garlick. For 35 years, I was a family lawyer and mediator, but I kept secret what was happening in my own family of origin. Now I know it's time to talk about it. So I'd like to warmly welcome you to Hello, It's Better to Talk. So I'm going to be talking to you about growing up in a haunted house, Slade Houghton Hall in Yorkshire, which was built in 1689. It's a very beautiful house. There's drawings of it in the British Museum. It was built in the time of William III and Mary II. And there was a barn at the back that was built in 1701. So, it's an old house, very beautiful, grey, gold stone, wonderful setting. There's a paddock, there's a Victorian greenhouse there, there's an orchard. It's a beautiful place, but there are also ghosts. And I know this for a number of reasons, but the main one being that I and my brother heard them. So my brother David and I used to live on our bedrooms were on the top floor of the house, and opposite my bedroom there was a billiard room. And we could hear at night the ghosts walking up and down the corridor, and then the noises, the voices came from the billiard room. So David would come into my bedroom and it felt safer for us to be together. We'd always have a light on, and when we had the light on, the voices would diminish. But if we turned the light off, the voices would be back again. So we tended to have a light on, and then we would comfort one another. Because my father didn't believe in ghosts, and my mother said, well, yes, there are ghosts in the house, but they're benign. Now, I don't know what she kind of meant by that, but there was one time where she did admit that she was lying in bed on her own and the ghost was trying to pull the bedclothes off her. And so she was pulling them back and the ghost was pulling them away from her, but still she maintained that the spirit, was benign. There were also other people who saw the ghost. I never saw anything, I just heard it, but there were our dog. We first of all had a golden retriever who was called Trevor, because my brother could never say his name, the retriever, properly. So we had a golden retriever called Trevor, and then after he died we had a Gordon setter called Cleo, and they would both bark, or they would each bark at something that went through the corridor downstairs, and they would bark so angrily, their hackles, their back of their neck would come up until the thing that we used to call that went through the dining room and then out the other side. So the dogs could pick it up. My brother and I could pick it up. My mother alluded to it. But the scariest thing of all was that there was one bedroom in the house where 3 of my brother's friends came to stay overnight, slept overnight, at different times. They're from different phases in his life, different schools. And they each described the following morning seeing the shape of a man's head with a cloth cap staring at them. They were each utterly terrified, and they each said they would never come back into the house again. So they never had another sleepover. My father would dismiss this as tosh, and my mother would say, oh, well, that's a pity. But, from David and my perspective, it was still pretty scary because we never knew whether the ghosts would be walking at night or not. They used to seem to be stirred up by something called an Ouija board, which some of you may have come across, which is where you invite spirits who've passed on to come and give you messages, and you ask them questions, and you all put your finger on an upturned glass, and then the spirit moves the glass to spell out answers. I used to hate the Ouija board, and so did David, because basically we felt that whenever my parents used the Ouija board, which was often after a party in the 70s, the Spanish wine would have been flowing, my mum would have cooked up a feast, and then they'd bring out the Ouija board, and then there would be lots of laughter and woo noises, but I felt it stirred up spirits, stirred up something in that house. The voices would get worse after the Ouija board had been used. And I can remember there was one time when my parents had a dinner party where they'd invited various guests, including a local bank manager and his wife, and her father had recently died, I subsequently learned, and she ran out of the house screaming, saying that she was never going to come back in again. So it was a house that was actually quite scary. And just for somebody to say, well, ghosts don't exist, when you've had some sensation that they are around and there is that kind of cold feeling. My parents didn't have just the Slade Houghton Hall, they also had the Salt Box, which is a pretty cottage down in Marham Church in North Cornwall. And that was a very happy house in many ways, but there was still something a little bit funny, I felt, around the stairs. And when I was a child, I can remember running through the hallway and then up the stairs as quickly as possible, and never wanting to do that I didn't want to take my time. It just felt like there was something a bit funny around the stairs. And we heard as children that a story that the house had used to belong to a sweet maker. And the sweet maker had a big stove at the back of the house where she boiled up her sweets. And one time she boiled up some toffee, but then she fell into the boiling vat of toffee and she sizzled to death, was how I was described it, which sounded pretty terrifying. But I never kind of really knew whether that story was true. And then somebody has contacted me who now lives in Bude, and she said that she and her 91-year-old sister were both born in the Salt Box, and the story was true, with one twist, which was that the sweet maker had not boiled to death on the stove, but had managed to crawl through the house, down through the hallway, and died at the bottom of the stairs. So when all of this is over, I would love to talk to these women and find out their stories about the Salt Box. The Salt Box has actually been sold by my parents now about 15 years ago, and it's been renovated, and I went to visit there with my aunt and cousin, and I honestly could say that it just feels like a warm, happy, lovely home nowadays. I don't know, they've somehow managed to sweep out the sweet maker's ghost as well as everything else. But all I would say to you is that if anybody says to you that they don't believe in ghosts and you have had some experiences, don't let them decry your experiences. You know what you know. So my reaction is, whatever. Thank you so much for staying to the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the ghosts. Please do subscribe, because then you'll get notified about new episodes that are coming up every Wednesday. And till next week, love and light to you all.